On the other hand, we desire, and therefore value. Economically, all kinds of things that cannot be called useful or serviceable without arbitrarily straining ordinary linguistic usage. If the concept of usefulness is to encompass everything that is in demand, it is logically necessary to accept the demand for the object as the decisive factor for economic activity, since otherwise not everything useful is in demand. Even with this modification, it is not an absolute factor and does not eliminate the relativity of values. In the first place, as we have seen, demand is not distinctly conscious unless there are barriers, difficulties and sacrifices between the object and the subject. In reality, we exert a demand only when the enjoyment of the object is measured by intermediate stages, when the price of patience, the renunciation of other efforts or enjoyments, set the object in perspective, and desire is equated with the exertion to overcome the distance. Secondly, the economic value of the object based upon the demand for it may be interpreted as a heightening or sublimation of the relativity embedded in the demand. For the object in demand becomes a value of practical importance to the economy only when the demand for it is compared with the demand for other things. Only this comparison establishes a measure of demand. Only if there is a second object which I am willing to give away for the first, or vice versa, does each of them have a measurable economic value. There is originally in the world of practice no single value, any more than there is originally in the world of consciousness a number one. It has often been asserted that the concept of two exists prior to the concept of one. The pieces of a broken cane require a term for plurality. The whole cane is a cane and there is no reason to call it one cane unless two canes with some relationship to each other are considered. Thus, the mere demand for an object does not yet create an economic value, because it does not include the required measure. Only a comparison of demands, i.e. the exchangeability of its objects, assigns a definite economic value to each of them. Without the category of equality, one of those fundamental concepts that shape the worldview out of particulars, yet only gradually acquire a psychological reality, no utility, and no scarcity, however great, would bring about economic transactions. Whether two objects are equally in demand and equally valuable can only be ascertained owing to the lack of an external measure, by exchanging them against each other in idea or in reality, while experiencing no variation in value sentiments. In fact, it may be that originally the exchangeability did not indicate equality of value as an objective quality of things, but that equality was simply the term used for exchangeability. The intensity of demand by itself does not necessarily increase the economic value of objects. Since value is expressed only through exchange, demand can affect the value only to the extent that it modifies exchange. Even though I crave an object, this does not determine its equivalent in exchange. Either I do not yet possess the object, in which case my desire for the object, unless I express it, will not exert any influence upon the demand of the present owner and he will ask a price in accordance with his own or the average interest in the object, or I do possess the object, and in that case my price may be so high that the object cannot be exchanged at all, i.e. it is no longer an economic value, or else I shall have to reduce the price to correspond with the degree of interest shown by a prospective buyer. The decisive fact is that practical economic value is never just value in general, but is by its very nature a definite sum of value, that this sum results from the measurement of two intensities of demand, that the form that this measurement takes within the economy is the exchange of sacrifice and gain, and that, consequently, the economic object does not have, as seems at first sight, an absolute value as a result of the demand for it, but the demand, as the basis of a real or imagined exchange, endows the object with value. The relativity of value as a result of which objects in demand become values only through the process of mutual exchange seems to suggest that value is nothing more than the price, and that no differences in their level can exist, in which case, the frequent discrepancy between price and value would refute the theory. But the theory claims that value would never have been established without the general phenomenon that we call price. That an object is economically valuable means that it is of value to me, that I am willing to give something for it. A value can become practically effective only by being equivalent to other values, i.e. by being exchangeable. Equivalence and exchangeability are reciprocal notions, which express the same state of affairs in two different forms, in a condition of rest and in motion, so to speak. What could possibly motivate us to endow objects, beyond the naive subjective enjoyment that they afford, with the peculiar significance that we call value? It cannot be due simply to their scarcity. For if scarcity existed simply as a fact that we could not alter, as in reality we do not only by productive work but also by changes of ownership, we should accept it as a natural quality of the external world, of which we might not even be aware and which would leave objects without any emphasis beyond their factual qualities. This emphasis arises from the fact that objects have to be paid for by the patience of waiting, the effort of searching, the exertion of labor, the renunciation of other things in demand. Without a price in the most general meaning of the word there is no value. A belief of some South Sea Islanders expresses this feeling in a naive way: the cure prescribed by a doctor will not take effect unless he is paid. The fact that one of two objects is more valuable than the other is represented only by the fact that a person is willing to exchange one for the other, but not vice versa. Where practical relationships are still simple and limited in scale, a higher or lower value can only be the consequence or expression of the direct practical will to exchange. And when we say that we have exchanged things because they are of equal value, that is only an example of a frequent conceptual linguistic reversal, as in the case where we believe that we love somebody because he has certain qualities, whereas we have granted him these qualities because we love him, or where we derive moral imperatives from religious dogmas, whereas we actually believe in the dogmas because the moral imperatives vitally concern us. In conceptual terms, price coincides with the economically objective value. Without price it would be impossible to draw the dividing line between objective value and the subjective enjoyment of goods. From the standpoint of the contracting subjects, the statement that exchange presupposes equality of values is not correct. A and B may exchange their possessions and because they are of equal value. But A would not have any reason to give away if he received only an equal value by acquiring. Must be a greater value for him than a which he owned before. Similarly B must gain more than he loses by the exchange. If, therefore, is more valuable than A for A and is more valuable than for B, the differences objectively balance each other as far as an observer is concerned. But this equality of values does not exist for the contracting party who receives more than he gives away. If, nevertheless, he is convinced that he has made a fair deal and has exchanged equal values, this should be stated, in respect of A, as follows: objectively, he has given an equivalent to B, the price for the object, but subjectively the value of is greater for him than the value of A. But the sense of value that A attaches to is a unit, and the dividing line between the objective value and the subjective surplus is no longer perceptible. Only the fact that the object is exchanged, that it is a price and costs a price, draws this line and determines the quantum of subjective value with which the object enters the process of exchange as an objective value. Another observation also demonstrates that exchange is in no way conditioned by a preceding representation of the objective equality of values. If one watches how children, impulsive individuals and apparently also primitive peoples, carry out exchange, it is apparent that they will give away any treasured property for an object that they strongly desire to own at a given moment, regardless of whether the price is much too high in the general estimation or even for themselves when they have had an opportunity to think the matter over calmly. This contradicts the notion that every exchange must be consciously advantageous to the subject. This is not the case, because the whole action lies subjectively beyond the question of equality or inequality of the objects exchanged. The idea that a balancing of sacrifice and gain precedes the exchange and must have resulted in an equilibrium between them is one of those rationalistic platitudes that are entirely psychological. This would require an objectivity towards one's own desires of which the people I have just discussed are incapable.